क्योंकि स्लाइड्स जो है वो तो अंग्रेजी डेस्टिनी है, जो भी हमारे मंजिल तक हमें पहुंचना है, हमारे तकदीर या हमारे किस्मत है, वो लास्ट जो है उस पर निर्भर करता है। उदाहरण स्वरूप आप देखिए डॉक्टर B.R. अम्बेडकर, उनके जीवन में बचपन में कितना संघर्ष करना पड़ा। पढ़ाई के लिए उनको स्कूल में कक्षा के बाहर बैठ के सुनना पड़ता था। तो इस तरीके से, और देखिए गांधी जी, अनदर एग्जाम्पल, वो ही वाज ऑफ कोर्स of the upper caste. He had all the wonderful resources available by the parents. He even wanted to go to London, England and become a barrister. He was allowed to go. Not many people have this, but you can see these two examples. Like that, there are many. I mean, Abraham Lincoln's father, he was a mochi, a cobbler. And sometimes some people, in the Congress would make fun of him that, look, this guy's father is a cobbler. But then he would say, okay, my father was a cobbler, but he was the best of cobblers. The way he made the shoes, each pair of shoes had a distinctive mark of excellence. So, I mean, with these few words of introduction, I look upon every human being with the eyes of nobility and goodness. I mean, this is something we have been taught also as a member of the Baha'i community, that we have to look upon every human being. And this is important because it's going to link to the UNESCO's reports on education. So with this little bit of background, very soon in the month of November, this planet will have 8 billion people. शीघ्र रही नवंबर माह तक हमारे इस धरती पर 8 अरब लोग की जनसंख्या हो जाएगी। और यूनाइटेड नेशंस पॉपुलेशन फंड का कुछ अरेंजमेंट्स भी किया है कि जो 8वां अरब बच्चा कहाँ जन्म लेता है उसका भी वो जानना चाहेंगे। तो इस 8 अरब लोग इस धरती पे रह रहे हैं, तो इनके लिए शिक्षा की जो नीति नियम या प्रणाली या जो रणनीति या एक पॉलिसी डॉक्यूमेंट यूनेस्को ने बहुत ही विचार विमर्श के पश्चात पेश किया था, और उसमें उन्होंने 3 रिपोर्ट्स दिए हैं। और ये तीन रिपोर्ट्स में आप देखेंगे, राइट फ्रॉम द फर्स्ट रिपोर्ट ऑफ द 1971-72 में दिया था, उसमें वो हर वक्त कहते हैं कि मनुष्य को अपने भविष्य के बारे में सोचना है। तो पहला रिपोर्ट का जो टाइटल था लर्निंग टू बी, 2 dots, the world of education today and tomorrow. So at that time, the chairman of this commission was Edgar Faure, a former prime minister and minister of education of France. So learning to be, and you will see how this also connects to the next report. And in learning to be, is report mein, they pointed out that the risk of inequalities, privatation, suffering, and the report emphasized universal features of education. The Faure report called for the continued expansion of education for lifelong education. तो आप देखिए कि 1971-72 में भारत की परिस्थिति क्या थी। हालांकि हमारे देश में सबसे पहला जो एक एजुकेशन रिपोर्ट आया वो तो आजादी के पहले भी था, जाकिर हुसैन कमिटी ऑन एजुकेशन ऑफ 1932, और आजादी के बाद आफ्टर इंडिपेंडेंस इन 1948 देयर वाज द डॉक्टर राधाकृष्णन कमीशन ऑन एजुकेशन, एंड एट दैट टाइम वाज मेजॉरिटी ऑफ द पीपल ऑफ इंडिया वर illiterate, and there was in the constitution also a provision was made that literacy would be achieved by 1960, and it was not achieved. Then it was again decided that by 1975, there would be literacy, because without basic literacy, how can you get the rest of education? So, and learning to be, that means we are all lifelong learners. And in that report, they analyzed the situation of education. And at that time already, of course, the world was divided into 2 major blocks, led by the United States, which was a foremost capitalist country, and the other was the Soviet Union. So there was the first world and the second world, and all the rest who were not part of these 2 blocks, they were the third world. And India, of course, mooted the non-aligned movement, since that was also a reality. But coming to this education report, this was what it was. I can't go into too many details, but from the 1948 Commission report, we moved on to Sri Prakasa Committee of 1956. And finally, a major landmark was that Kothari Commission, which in 64-66 came up with a very major educational program. And of course, the UNESCO report was still not there. So that report became a landmark, and then it continued for a long time. Even today, when we look at the school system, because education is a state subject, and it was largely dependent upon each state, though the central government was also responsible, but it continued. And our goal for complete literacy was pushed to 1975. And by that time, this report had come. But in 1975, still, we did not achieve literacy of the majority population of India. And the inequalities continued because India is a developing country, and today it's an emerging economy, and we are today the 5th largest economy of the world. But still, inequalities are very deep-seated. And this is a worldwide phenomenon. And these inequalities are also a very major cause for the way societies are shaped. So I will not go too much into details. And the next report that the UNESCO presented was the 1993-96 report. And they again set up a commission, international commission, and under the leadership of Jacques Delors, the former president of the European Commission and former French Minister of Economy and Finance. And they prepared a really wonderful report. And there were 16 members drawn from around the world. And India was represented by Honorable Dr. Karan Singh. So he represented the government of India in this second international commission, which is also called the Delors Commission report. So in this, they prepared and published a report which was titled Learning the Treasure Within. यानी सीखने की जो प्रक्रिया है वो क्या है, क्योंकि इस रिपोर्ट में आप अध्ययन करेंगे तो पाएंगे कि हर मानव को एक खान की दृष्टि से देखा गया है और इस खान में छिपे हुए मणि मुक्ताएं हैं, because human beings are like that mine full of jewels of inestimable value. So learning is a process where we discover the potentialities inherent in every human being. तो सीखने की प्रक्रिया के माध्यम से ही हम अपने जो अपने ज्ञान है, अपना कौशल है, अपने में जो भी हुनर है, प्रतिभाएं हैं, उसको हम विकसित करते हैं, प्रकाशित करते हैं, और फिर इससे अपना जीवन का भी एक मार्ग बनता है, दायरा बनता है. और इस रिपोर्ट में उन्होंने और भी बताया कि इट्स वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट फॉर अ ह्यूमैनिस्टिक अप्रोच टू एजुकेशन, एंड दे एस्टैब्लिश्ड दैट देयर आर 4 पिलर्स ऑफ एजुकेशन, और 4 स्तंभ इसमें आइडेंटिफाई उन्होंने किया. और पहला स्तंभ है लर्निंग टू बी. सीखने की प्रक्रिया से हमें ये समझना चाहिए कि जो उन्होंने पहले रिपोर्ट में भी बताया कि लर्निंग टू बी, हम एक मानव है, मनुष्य है, वी आर ह्यूमन बीइंग्स, एंड वी ह्यूमन बीइंग्स आर ऑलवेज इन नीड ऑफ एजुकेशन. एंड वी ऑल नो that our first educators were our mothers. They are the primary educators. So we had a country where large proportion of the women folk were illiterate. They were also malnourished. I mean, this was the country of India. And of course, if mothers are illiterate or they themselves are deprived, then obviously a lot of the burden of tradition, some of it is mixed with superstitions and prejudices. जो अंधविश्वास या पूर्वाग्रह है, वो भी बच्चों को दे दिया जाता है. So the first pillar is learning to be. As a human being, let me be conscious. And in our Indian tradition, self-realization is the acme of our spiritual endeavors. Then they said the second pillar is learning to know. So as a human being, how do I know? मैं ज्ञान कैसे अर्जित करूं? सीखने की प्रक्रिया का ये भी एक उद्देश्य है. और जहां तक पहला है learning to be, actually that is like आत्म योग, self realization. So second is like ज्ञान योग, learning to know. The third is learning to do. क्योंकि साथ साथ कौशल प्राप्त करना भी बहुत आवश्यक है. आज हम जानते हैं लाखों या करोड़ों की संख्या में लोगों के पास डिग्री और डिप्लोमास वगैरह है, लेकिन जब काम की बात आती है तो उनके पास कौशल नहीं है, काम करने के लायक नहीं है. तो इसलिए वो जो लर्निंग टू डू है उसमें स्किल डेवलपमेंट्स, कौशल भी आ जाता है. कौशल इट इज यू हैव टू हैव. और जब मैं स्कूल में था तो वी हैड ऑलवेज प्रैक्टिकल क्राफ्ट्स apart from whatever learnings that we got through our teachers and the book studies. We had to learn either something to do with carpentry or leather stitching. Some activities were there. Then there were socially usefully productive activities, or you had the option of joining the NCC. There also you learned, you acquired a lot of skills. And finally, the fourth pillar in the second report was learning to live together. You just imagine learning to live together. Yani Sahaj Yoga. If we don't know how to live together, then you can imagine the plight of our humanity. Why is it in such a great peril? आज ऐसी यानी महाप्रलय की परिस्थिति में हम क्यों हैं? Because we have not learned to live together. हमने अपने आप को कितने बेबुनियादी कारण के आधार पर विभाजित कर दिया है. चाहे वो नस्ल के आधार पे हो, या जात के आधार पे हो, या धर्म के आधार पे हो, या अपने क्लास, अपने जो पर्सनल वेल्थ के आधार पे हो, या अपने पढ़ाई. So always there is these binaries. In fact, there are multiple binaries of us and them and we and they and all that. And today also, this is the greatest tragedy of the human race. एक तरफ तो हमें संदेश दे रहे हैं वसुधैव कुटुंबकम, कि सारा कुटुंब एक परिवार के, पूरा विश्व का एक कुटुंब के समान है और हम इस कुटुंब के सदस्य हैं. और दूसरी तरफ बेबुनियादी बातें, इसका कोई फाउंडेशन नहीं है, उसके कारण पर भी हमें विभाजित कर दिया गया और आइडेंटिटी क्राइसिस बन जाता है. तो ये चार स्तंभ को और विस्तार से भी हम समझ सकते हैं. और हमने देखा है कि अपने एजुकेशन पॉलिसी में बारी बारी से कुछ हद तक इस डॉक्यूमेंट के कुछ हिस्से हमें मिलता है. यानी एज अ पॉलिसी डॉक्यूमेंट लिखित दृष्टिकोण से अगर देखें तो हमें मिलता है, लेकिन जमीनी तौर की वास्तविकता कुछ और है. So this was a very important UNESCO publication, and it was endorsed and accepted by most of the governments around the world. And you remember in India, after the Kothari Commission report, one major development happened in 1986, when a new education policy was given to the country. And then it continued. After that, many changes also were introduced. And finally, when they had to work for another new national education policy, we had to wait till 2020. So this 2020, July 2020 education policy of the government of India has also many interesting features. But if they do not sincerely implement all those provisions, then the plight of the country will continue to as it is. Inequalities will be there. Divisions will be there, and there will be always tension. And remember, friends, in 2002, the Supreme Court gave a verdict, and they made education a fundamental right. So that brought also a policy change. And after that, there was a right to education. That also was an important factor. And in the right to education, the state and the center both had equal responsibility. So 50% of the educational budget goes from the center to the state governments, and the remaining 50% they are responsible to raise. sometimes we have seen that the state, they utilize the central government's budgetary allocation, and then they once again, with an empty bowl, they turn to the central government and say that we can't implement the policies or we can't bring about the changes because we have no resources. They were supposed to also try and do it. So these kinds of situations also do emerge. And then about the quality of learning also, I heard some of these scholars, and they've said that most of the teaching that happens in our schools and colleges do not actually provide learning. God knows what it means, but at the time of admissions, we know that even with sometimes 95% marks, a child may not be able to get the admission in a college he or she wants. Those are related challenges which we can address, but I want to keep my focus on UNESCO's documents and also on the new education policy. Because Bharat is one land which has such profound diversity. And if this diversity is not appreciated positively, then it leads to a lot of crises. And some of it, we are experiencing it today. So from childhood, if we had adhered to UNESCO's recommendations of the education policy documents, I'm sure that we would have had a much more holistic vision. But oftentimes, like in many other dimensions of life, politics plays a dirty game. And politics also becomes responsible for dividing. And many times, to reach to the seat of power, people do things which in the long run harm the interests of the entire country. तो हम एक तरफ तो हमारी चाह है, हमारी इच्छा है, हमारी दृढ़ संकल्प भी है कि हम एक समृद्ध और उज्जवल भविष्य की ओर बढ़े और इस देश को हम पूरे विश्व के लिए एक विश्व गुरु के स्वरूप में प्रस्तुत करें, लेकिन जो चुनौतियां हैं उसको लाने के लिए हम क्या प्रयत्न कर रहे हैं। तो इस दृष्टि से अगर हम यूनेस्को के एजुकेशन पॉलिसी डॉक्यूमेंट को फिर दोबारा देखें तो मैंने कुछ कंपैरिजन भी किया है। कई चीजें आप अपने न्यू एजुकेशन पॉलिसी में आपको मिलेंगे जो हमारे संस्कार, संस्कृति और हमारे देश की जो एक प्राचीन धरोहर है उसको बहुत अच्छी तरीके से प्रस्तुत किया जा रहा है और शिक्षा के पाठ्यक्रम में भी उसको लिया गया है। लेकिन हमें ध्यान रखना है कि भारत में सिर्फ एक प्रकार के लोग नहीं रहते हैं और इसकी जो विविधता है, अनेकता है, वो इसको अगर पॉजिटिव यानी सकारात्मक दृष्टि से हमें इसको समझना है तो हमें कुछ चीजों को कुछ ऐसे पहल भी करने होंगे कि हमारे देश के सभी नागरिक, देश के सभी बच्चे, सभी किशोर और किशोरियां, युवा शुरू से ही उनका ये एक व्यापक और विश्वव्यापी दृष्टिकोण बना रहे। तो 1996 के डॉक्यूमेंट के बाद जो तीसरा उनका जो डॉक्यूमेंट था वो 2015 में दिया गया और उसमें इसका टाइटल है रीथिंकिंग एजुकेशन टुवर्ड्स अ ग्लोबल कॉमन गुड। एंड इसमें उन्होंने देखा कि 1996 को जो उन्होंने 21वीं सदी के लिए जो पाठ्यक्रम दिया, उन्होंने देखा, मूल्यांकन और आकलन करके देखा कि कितने हद तक पूरे विश्व में अलग अलग देशों ने इसको कार्यान्वित रूप दिया है। तो इसलिए उन्होंने ये टाइटल दिया रीथिंकिंग एजुकेशन टुवर्ड्स अ ग्लोबल कॉमन गुड, बिकॉज यू नो ग्लोबल कॉमन गुड हैज टू डू विथ the finite resources of the planet. And so they propose that education and knowledge as global common goods are very important because as population is increasing and resources are becoming scarce and there is a big divide, the inequalities have become even deeper among the nations and among the peoples. And then there was one more, the latest report that came in 2020 actually, reimagining our futures together. So now the whole question is about the survival of the planet itself. Reimagining our futures together, a new social contract for education. And this builds on the global ethos of how this planet is our only home, and we need to be able to work together and not keep dividing ourselves and fighting over resources, fighting to ensure that our ideological outlook remains predominant. The hegemonic, agendas of many big powers, all of this actually are part of the education policy dialogue. And we have to take action on multiple grounds. Otherwise, we will continue to put this world into greater and greater peril. So, from my perspective, I feel that the comprehensive presentation on the many facets of education and the challenges facing humankind have been addressed very cogently in all of these documents, and every government, because majority of the governments who are member states of the United Nations, out of the 196 countries, 190 countries are member states, they have endorsed these documents. But unfortunately, जब इसको कार्य क्षेत्र में लाते हैं, तो फिर हमारे नेशनल एजेंडा भी बीच में आ जाता है, कभी-कभी कुछ पॉलिटिकल ऑब्जेक्टिव्स भी जो होते हैं, वो भी हमारे लिए एक बाधा बन सकते हैं और बन जाते हैं। तो मेरा एक विनम्र निवेदन है कि अगर हमारी नेशनल एजुकेशन पॉलिसी को हमें सफल रूप से कार्य में लाना है, तो हमारा दृष्टिकोण बहुत स्पष्ट होना चाहिए और हमारी जो प्राचीन धरोहर है उसको भी हमें याद रखकर वसुधैव कुटुंबकम और का जो हमने संदेश पूरे विश्व को दिया है, उसको हमें एक वास्तविक और एक व्यापक तरीके से लेना होगा. So that is the urgent need to change the way we are living in the world today, to change the way we are living in India today. Today there are so many challenges, people are raising it. On the one hand, of course, there are great leaders who are trying their best to pursue the development agenda and tell the world that we are the fastest growing economy in the world in terms of GDP. Well, it's a very good thing. And many policies are also being made to achieve those goals. But if those goals are going to be achieved at the cost of creating serious problems in the unity and diversity concept, which is the fundamental of our ethos, then surely there will be serious challenges, and we will ourselves have to be blamed for the mess we have created, be it in the systems of governance, in the economic policies, in the social settings, in the educational programs, and whatever other related things. So throughout history, those responsible with the task of educating the citizens in their own countries have been faced with a paradox. First of all, to be truly educated, one must understand the nature of reality and the nature of human beings. If we have been telling ourselves, and in learning to be, we have to grapple with this problem, that as human beings, if we are the best of all creation, we are the most intelligent of all beings, we are the ones who have created civilization. No other creature, कोई भी प्राणी, पक्षी, कोई भी प्राणी कभी भी सभ्यता की स्थापना नहीं की है. तो इस मानव ने इतनी सारी सभ्यताओं का हमारे पास इतिहास में रिकॉर्ड्स भी हैं, क्योंकि अकॉर्डिंग टू आर्नल्ड टॉइनबी द ग्रेट ब्रिटिश हिस्टोरियन, हमारे 10,000 वर्ष के इतिहास में लगभग 21 सभ्यताओं के नाम और निशान हमें मिलते हैं, और अधिकतर तो वो सब लुप्त हो गए और या कुछ तो विलुप्त भी हो गए. लेकिन भारत जो एक जीवित सभ्यता है और इसकी इतनी प्राचीन धरोहर है, अब अगर हमें वास्तव में विश्व गुरु का अगर श्रेय हमें प्राप्त करना है तो नेचुरली हमारे शिक्षा के जो नीति नियम है उसके माध्यम से ही हम करेंगे। और कुछ लोगों ने बहुत इसमें कुर्बानी दी है, योगदान भी दिया है। And I cannot, of course, omit the mention of the late President Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam. He understood how technology can be also effectively harnessed to bring knowledge to the doorstep of every citizen of this country. And whether you are an elderly or whether you are a child, you have access to knowledge. और मेरे जो स्लाइड्स है उसमें आप देखेंगे, एक स्लाइड ये भी है कि 1 मिनट के अंदर आज समस्त मानव जाति, क्योंकि उनके पास जो साधन है, through the smartphone, how we are connected to each other. And just on the 1st October, we are going to be launching the 5G. And you just imagine the processing powers. Today, an ordinary smartphone has the processing power that is 250 times more than what was the computer processing power that sent man to the moon in 1969. And of course, the latest phones, they have got 500 times the processing power. So friends, on the one hand, we are communicating at the speed of light. And on the other hand, we are also traveling at the speed of sound. And yet, the distance between our head and heart, because in education, head, heart, and hand, sometimes this distance is not traversed. We have so many challenges. There is dichotomies. There is real, a division. And persons like David Bohm, Peter Senge, Kamran Iqbal, they have analyzed, because all human beings are actually creatures who are learners. And once we stay on that learning trajectory, then we can appreciate that the great minds who have put together these UNESCO documents really are for the welfare and the betterment of the whole world. So I would like to invite you to also see these slides. And of course, I would have loved to be physically present, and I will come very soon. I'm thankful to both Professor Anand Kumar and Professor Randhir Gautam ji for giving me this opportunity to share these few thoughts. And when we meet